Hello everybody, welcome back to another gaming vlog, and today we're talking about why we like silent protagonists in games. When we do, it's one of those things, it is a tool, isn't it? Your protagonist, how you want to create the character, whether it's going to be around a fixed sort of story that evolves and the character is going to have its own personality, or if it's going to be sort of a blank slate for the player to insert himself or herself into the game world. Big decision. Let's talk about some cases where they did it right or they did it wrong. And for this, I like to go back to my roots, my first RPG game, which was, of course, Final Fantasy VII, the original. And when I played this, Cloud, the protagonist, was very much lacking personality or apathetic, didn't have much input in a lot of situations. He was not interested, was his whole shebang, and he did have a small arc where he did start to give a fuck about things as the game goes, but in large measure, it was very easy for me to view him as my window into that world and kind of put myself into his place a lot. And I think that was much the intention of the developers. And it did help that he, of course, wasn't voiced. This was a very simple game with JPEG backgrounds and stuff like that. So, of course, no voicing for characters. But when you fast forward to current games, you all of a sudden have a choice, right? You could voice that character, but it does come at a cost, doesn't it? You do find that voiced characters have more of their own personality. It's harder to put yourself in their place and really feel like you're a part of what's taking place in the world, as opposed to just viewing something from someone else's perspective or eyes. So for me, the pivotal point that should drive this decision of whether to have a silent protagonist or not is how much of an impact your input as a player will have over the development of the character. And very often we see that your input has no impact at all. Think about, for example, Final Fantasy XIV. Sure, you have some dialogue options. At the end of the day, it's not really going to affect how your character evolves or how people perceive you. You can also think about Persona 5 is another example where it's a silent protagonist, but your input is basically minimal. Your choices are yes, yes, very much so, yes, not as much. It's always gradations of the same thing, and never really changing how you are perceived as a character or you're viewed as a person. So games that do offer some chance to alter your perception, whether it's that you're a good person or you're an evil person, whatever it is, if it's a morality thing or if it's choice of outcome, maybe you're choosing what characters to end up with or which characters to develop a relationship with, whatever it may be, the more input you have as a player, I think the more of a case you can make for a silent protagonist, for the player to truly feel like they're putting themselves in those shoes. And that can make a lot of sense. I think that's one of the big reasons why Fallout 4 got so much flack. People hated on it a lot for having a voiced protagonist, but I think that really isn't the main issue. That's kind of a side issue that stems from the root problem that the game really didn't offer much change to your character's outcome or overall arc. Whatever you said in those dialogue options, it really didn't affect things in a big way. And I think that was ultimately the problem. In a Fallout game, coming from the prior games, people expected that true RPG stat checks. So if you don't have the stats high enough, you can't swing certain dialogue options. But if you can swing them, you can get a different outcome in the conversation, maybe get a new ally or a better relationship with someone or with a faction, all those sorts of things we come to expect from those games. And I think Fallout 4 was much more linear in what they were offering, and as a result, perhaps it did make sense to have a voiced protagonist that try to have a more solid personality and make the dialogue a bit more engaging at the cost of removing choice. Maybe that was their vision. Maybe that's why they went with that. And so I wouldn't necessarily criticize the voicing of the character in that particular case, but rather I would perhaps disagree with the choice of making it more linear. I think a lot of the strength in Fallout games is the ability to tailor the outcomes based on your preferences and have some real input as to how the game plays out for you, how those interactions play out. Witcher 3 is another modern example, but this time one where voicing the protagonist actually worked. And to a great extent, I think Geralt's personality was what grabbed so many players into the story and solidified the whole setting through his perspective, through his eyes. It really works to bring it all together. And in conversations, it was always enjoyable to get Geralt's take. You come to expect what he would say, and you come to sort of cherish his non-emotional but humorous input a lot of times in these conversations throughout the whole game. So I think silent protagonists still have their place in 2021, but you really need a case to be made to go for that choice, I believe. Otherwise, you're just well served with a nicely voiced character to flesh things out. But if you can offer true choice, true input, and true agency over the outcome, and your choices actually matter in the game, it can work very well to have a silent protagonist so that the player can feel like they're truly there making the decisions, and it's not someone else that they're viewing things through their perspective. So I want to hear from you. Do you prefer silent protagonists in games? Maybe give me an example of a game that really did this well, even in modern times, where you do have the choice of voicing or not voicing a character. Let me know down below. And as always, thanks for watching. We'll catch you next time.